Good afternoon to you. To our viewers, we have a special guest from Washington, D.C., Mr. Mesfin. We are going to discuss about crisis in East Africa. For those of you who have not been following to what's happening in East Africa, for over 60 days, the Tigray region of Ethiopia was attacked by Eritrean forces and by Ethiopian federal forces and Amhara militia based on ethnic in the Tigray region. The agenda was for the Eritrean mercenaries and the federal troops of Ethiopia, minus those from Tigray who served proudly as Ethiopians for as long as that I can remember. The federal government who refused to hold an election based on an excuse as COVID-19, while he create massive war that he miscalculated, misunderstood the political and humanitarian crisis throughout the region, not just in Tigray, Ethiopia, but in the Horn of Africa, which is why we have titled today Crisis in East Africa. Before I get there, I became to know Mr. Mesfin through the movement that we have created here in North America. We, the Tigray origin Americans in the United States, Canada, and I'm sure throughout the world, have seen a genocide in the 21st century that I can only remember in history in the 19th century what Hitler did. People also talk about genocide in Rwanda, but I'm afraid that the genocide in Tigray may exceed far beyond what we saw in Rwanda. Mr. Mesfin, as an engineer, had returned to Ethiopia and had worked for over 10 years in various fields, including with TDA. But most importantly, I've learned that part of his mission is being as an advocate. When I reach out to him, when I need some guidance and resources that what we can do, he's always been there. One of the important thing that I'm really inspired is he doesn't complain the level of work that we have, burdened him with, including putting together an office in such short time in Washington, D.C. for Tigray community so that we can organize, so we can have a central office that we can all coordinate and work together, raising money to help those who are displaced, what we can do politically to end the crisis in Ethiopia. So before I go further, Mr. Mesfin, welcome to Cyber Power of Tigray. I would like to give you the opportunity to actually introduce yourself to our audience before we go into our discussions and topics of questions that I would like to go over with you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So compared to what you guys do, and many other Tigrayans do, what I do is just a minuscule, very little in a sense. It's something that I've been doing for many years. It comes natural, but also, but it's no comparison by any sense of imagination. In fact, I am extremely happy to see now the involvement of the young generation of Tigrayans that have taken the mantle. They have given us the confidence to sit back and if at all, if need be, give advices. We don't really have to be at the front line any longer. So that comforts me. That gives me a sense of achievement, in a sense, those of us who were in the field of social justice, community organizations, and so forth for the past 50 years, now are beginning to see our fruit. So I am deeply appreciative of what you do as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Actually, that is very nice to highlight what you say. The youth across America, those who I've been involved actually in the Pacific Northwest, it's moving to see them regardless. And many of them, by the way, actually do not speak Tigrinya, but their blood is, as we say, thicker than, blood is thicker than water. They know what's happening back home. Even when they don't speak the language, they understand what's happening. You don't have to speak the language for that matter to see there's crisis, there's humanitarian crisis. We have stated in the show in the past, more than 2.3 million children in Tigray are in needs of humanitarian assistance. I believe the displacement is close to 60,000 now in Sudan, even though the federal troops have sealed and Eritrean troops have sealed the border. But I want to, kind of, we have a lot of topics that I want us to cover, but can you share with me and the audience to understand why is Abiy Ahmed, number one, why did he refuse to hold an election, which the system that I know in this country as American, we hold an election and the winner then gets inaugurated, which our system is based on. In November, we voted for our choices. January 20th, we're going to have a new president that will be inaugurated. At the federal level. At the state level, where I reside in the state of Oregon, we elect our own governor, which what I thought in Tigray was no different than what we would do in a logical sense. So my question for you is, why did Abiy Ahmed refuse to hold an election using excuses that doesn't justify the means, but yet attack 6.5 million or so an estimated people in the region where they kept the peace and stability that far exceeded in any part of the Horn of Africa, for that matter?
Well, it's a huge topic to address in just one moment. But let me take you back a little bit. The EPRDF was in power for about 25 years. EPRDF is a combination of four organizations that had essentially an equal number of representations in the political process. But despite that, EPRDF as a government had its own deficiencies, however minute compared to its achievements are. Nevertheless, there were deficiencies in areas of democracy, in areas of good governance. So this brought about discontent by many people that wanted a change. And the government, in its last deliberation, actually addressed this very seriously, apologized to the people of Ethiopia that such deficiencies had taken place, that it took a full responsibility and committed itself to at least addressing and rectifying these problems. But behind the scene, the last, one could say maybe 2 years preceding Abiy's coming to power, there was an internal political power or internal political dynamics that was changing. The political center was changing from predominantly ideological thinking that aspired to have a multi-ethnic federation, a political thinking that aspired an economic development program that is contrary to the neoliberal thinking, and motivated a very small group of people, motivated and inspired and supported by Western governments, wanted to change this dynamics. They wanted to take the country back to a unitary state. They wanted to take it back to an economic environment in which a neoliberal economic process will take. Because the past 25 years, the economic successes of Ethiopia was based on this policy, the policy of the PRDF government, and we saw enormous economic, social, and political developments in the country. Ethiopia, just to cite a few examples, Ethiopia was by 2015, 2016, it was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Ethiopia had an infrastructure, social infrastructure, that allowed hundreds of universities, thousands of colleges, high schools, and hundreds of thousands of elementary schools. So a country that had in 1991 only had four colleges and universities had about 42 government built universities, and close to that number on private sector universities. So you can imagine the political transformation and the economic transformation that has taken place. Ethiopia had probably one of the peaceful periods in its history in terms of peacefulness. So despite all these achievements, now you had governments that did not like its policies, who actually had a role to play in the coming of Abiy Ahmed. So Abiy Ahmed was, one, in the service of his masters. Two, he was a political person that had wanted to chew, to bite more than he can chew. He had an aspiration of a dictatorial proclivity. So you have all this into play. So in 1990, in 2018, in the mass movement that was that had transpired, he came to power. For a brief moment of time, a lot of people had a goodwill. Some had even adulations for him. He spoke the right things. He said the right things. Some people thought there will be a continuity with some of the deficiencies rectified. But he had his own agendas. His agenda was primarily transpired by the desire to have a unitary state, a power-hungry individual who wanted to make sure that he has established a domination of his own making. He was to establish a government that symbolizes his dominance. So, for that reason, the TPLF was sort of a hurdle that he had to overcome. But despite this, when this change took place, the TPLF, rather than, which had enormous influence in the military, that had enormous influence in various in the security and so forth, did not want to engage its assumed power to maintain the power, the government. Instead, withdrew to Tigray to avoid any crises in in the capital city particularly. But what happened after that is that the sentiments of the people began to change. Abiy Ahmed uh, began to target the TPLF and the people of Tigray, for that matter. Uh, 2 months after he came to power, he accused the people of Tigray and the TPLF as conspiring to assassinate him, and a public bombing that took place, which even the FBI had discounted. So if you look at the background, that is it. And now to answer your question against this backdrop, why did he postpone the elections, or why did he not have wanted to have an election? Is because by the time the election period was coming around, he had already depleted any political currency he may have had. So he knew he would lose the election if the election was to take place at the scheduled time, and not only at the scheduled time, but at the constitutionally mandated date. So that was one of the reasons that he didn't want to hold elections, and as a result, when there was resistance against that decision not to have the elections, then he began to arrest opposition forces.
Political, that is.
Exactly,
Political.
all political parties.
Sure, sure.
In fact, leadership of many of the largest political leaders were arrested, and Ethiopia had become really one of the probably prisons were filled with political prisoners, particularly the leadership of the political parties. So that is what had transpired, and that's why he did not want to have an election, primarily because that election would have meant he would be losing the ground.
So I appreciate like how clearly you explain the history. Obviously, is bigger than what you are able to pitch in such short time. For those who are not clear what some of the acronyms that you use, EPRDF is that it's Ethiopian People's Revolution Democratic Front, which was formed late 80s. I remember that I was a child, a refugee in Sudan, and I was a proud Wayana back then, and then TPLF, of course, the Tigray People Liberation Front. But I was displaced during the Derg era as a child, and of course, became a refugee here in the U.S., which is how I became a U.S. citizen. Which I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones that when my older brothers and sisters and my everyone that I know in my place, where I'm not going to throw the name out here, we were the target, which is what we see today in Tigray. We were the target based on our ethnic. And, it's sad for me to see in my lifetime 3 different war. I feel like I'm, 300 years old, because it breaks my heart that the opportunity Ethiopia have had once the Tigray People Liberation Front form a unity to include all Ethiopians, even though they knew it was almost at the end of their victory to defeat Mengistu. They knew that running it by themselves was not really going to be a democratic process. And yeah, I think you described like it was EPRDF, the Ethiopian People Revolution Democratic Front. Their leadership, I think it was not perfect, and nobody's perfect, but it breaks my heart. And for those who don't understand, is that Ethiopia was registering an average of 10% GDP, and it actually surpassed China. And the political influence, not just for Ethiopia, but for Africa, I remember under Medlis it was phenomenal. We were seeing the uprising buildings throughout Addis Ababa and various communities across Ethiopia. And yet, you have certain group, particularly it sounds like finger pointed, but it's a fact. The Amhara have consistently and continuously built hate towards the Tigray people. And it, I remember in 2005, after the opposition party gained quite a bit in the election, there was a chant saying all Tigrayans leave to Mekelle and all our properties be returned to Addis Ababa, which is the Amharic, the version they used was, Tigray ወደ መቀሌ ንብረታችን ወደ ቀበሌ. So my point here is, why, number one, why are we hating each other to the point where we are now massacring our own people? And I mean, do you think it was a mistake for Abiy Ahmed to actually elevate to the leadership role that he is in, when in fact he actually was not eligible to become prime minister of Ethiopia through, I don't mean to shove something at you, but I follow the politic of it. Actually, when he became a prime minister, he wasn't even eligible to become a prime minister. Do you think that was a mistake for a guy who's never held an office? I mean, he's been in the security apparatus. We know he's serving the military. Do you think that was a mistake for him to actually become prime minister without understanding any diplomacy, any leadership role that requires a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, and that you don't just use the power that's given to you to govern a nation of 110 million plus people? I mean, you think that's,
Well, here is Mike. And sometimes they say, you harvest what you seed. Abi is just was a consequence of the deficiencies I was talking about earlier. The EPRDF, when it lost its in the last years of its existence, when EPRDF lost its credibility, so to speak, it was mired with questions. It was filled with leaders who have had. The new leaders that were brought into power were with questionable character, and particularly those that came into power in the last maybe 10 years prior to the demise of IPRDF. And this decadence is probably what brought about Abiy. When you fail to live up to your principles, when you fail to live up to your commitments, the commitment that you have for the people, then naturally it festers the unwanted. So here's what it is. It wasn't brought in by democratic election, nor the consensus of party for that matter. It was behind the scene machinations that took place. So, every legitimacy that he could have earned, which he did not deserve, as you say, even that he wasn't able to. That power was given to him on a silver platter, and he had every opportunity to make the best out of it, and he had failed to do that. He didn't, and it wasn't in his character to do that in any case. So Ethiopia is in a crisis today. It's because of the crisis of leadership, and the leadership that took place in the last 3 years.
And the work that took over nearly 30 years to not just build the most powerful economy actually in the Horn of Africa. And I remember when Addis Ababa Airport, Bola International Airport, took over Johannesburg, the rumor was like, wow, where is Ethiopia headed? And we have certainly witnessed the unity throughout the continent that was being built, and Ethiopia being the model of the continent and hosting the African Union. It is sad for me to follow the head of the African Union dance around with a dictator and support a dictator, forget about everything else. But you know, why are African leaders so cold when it comes to their own people? I mean, is their heart really that cold to see such inhumane that when you have 2.3 million children suffering for basic needs, when you have mothers having to figure out how to cut their umbilicals on the road on their way to Sudan and dying in the process, like I, you know, there's there is so many things that we can cover, and I'm gonna, I'm
You
gonna
know,
ask about the
you
crisis.
know, yeah, it's probably we should be spending probably more time on what happened in the last 2 years and what had transpired as to begin with. But as you said, I think the skillful role that the Ethiopian leaders played in representing Africa, defining the foreign policy of Ethiopia, and by de facto the relationship between African countries. Uh, that once you lose that leadership quality, then obviously you tend to be at the mercy of others. Uh, the African leaders today, uh, if we had the type of leadership we've had uh, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, uh, the reaction of African governments would have been different. It would have been more proactive. It would have been more self-serving. It would have been African focused, inner focused, introspective in a sense. But we lost that because we do no longer have strong countries like Ethiopia at the time that could play an important role in international platforms that stood their ground, demanded their share of responsibilities and share of their what is desirable for them. So now they are at the mercy of the superpowers. The game that is being played now, as you know, uh, supposedly the Africans were supposed to solve their own problems. So African Union was supposed to have raised this issue, get a quick response. No, it didn't do that because there are other forces that prevents them from doing that, influence them, who has told them, give it time, because if given time, Abiy will be able to finish this in few days. Don't worry, it will be done. He will have it in control. So these are governments, and I'm not saying every single one of them, but at least the African Union as an institution that had dragged its feet so far, is I can only imagine that it is at the service of other forces that are also behind Abiy. It's very unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. Then how could one, after having seen experiences in Africa, you have seen crises in Liberia, we had seen massacres in Rwanda, we have seen what has taken place in Congo. Despite all this, we have not been sensitive to the tragedy of human suffering, and it is indeed a telling testimony of Africa today. So, unfortunately, that is it, and we have never relied on other forces to survive, and will continue to survive on our own. I mean, I'm sure it would have been nice to have the support of others, but if failing that, the determination and the ultimate responsibility is ours. So we'll do what it takes to to overcome where we are now.
Sure, but as a continent, why are we allowing the outside world provide us weapons to massacre our own civilians? Why is Africa as a continent unable to come together when one ethnic is targeted based on ethnicity, and yet you have like the head of the African Union dancing around a person who's turning a country that he was handed in the most democratic process. I remember when Desalegn had Mariam submit his resignation, the EPRDF held meeting after meeting to vote and nominate, however we want to call it, to Abiy Ahmed. And the power vacuum that he's created today, we've seen what's happening in Beishangul, which you have almost like a full-scale fighting happening between the Amharas and the Beishangul Gamas. Yet you have Sudan. But before I expand my question,
Why Africa?
Why is number one? Why is Africa a failed continent, and why is Eritrea involved in domestic affairs in Ethiopia? And the third question to go with that is, why is so much of the lies, the propaganda machine by Abiy Ahmed and the Amharas dancing with this guy who's actually determined to eliminate as many as Tigray origin people, not just in Tigray, but throughout Ethiopia? We know the mass arrest that has been taking place. I personally know people within my own blood family who retire years and years ago, who were military vets, had reside as civilians, as normal citizens in Ethiopia and Addis Ababa, have been locked up actually within the last 10 to 12 days. I'm not going to go to the list, but personal that I know within my own family that have been actually arrested. I mean, these are people who, they're in their, like late 70s. They're like, not only retired, but they have no ability to go fight in the middle, in the field, even if they were to return to Tigray. I mean, this is like the hate that we teach in our young generation. And so I guess I lump up too many questions for you, but the failure of the continent is my main focus. And then the Eritrea's involvement and Abiy Ahmed's miscalculation that's causing the crisis in the east of Africa, which we can do that, the third question. But let's cover first the failure in Africa as a continent and Eritrea's involvement in Tigray.
Well, just in my a few seconds of thoughts, and there are a lot of African intellectuals and African activists who blame the problem of Africa on its own leaders, nothing else but the leaders. Our leaders have failed us since independence days. Our African leaders have been more corrupt than the colonizers themselves. So their greed, their power hungriness, their corruption, and those are actually what what makes them less insensitive to their own people, to their own continent, and to their own countries. So, in general, that is the reason why I think they are susceptible to outside influence. They are susceptible to being mistreated as a second class. They allow themselves to do that, not because we have no resources in Africa, not because we don't have the intellect, not because we don't have the resourcefulness. No, because our leaders had failed us. And that's why you see the migration of Africans to other parts of the world, because it's not because they desire it to be. And many of them will probably go back to Africa and work in their own country, given if the environments were to be conducive to do that. So generally, that's how I believe the reasons are. This ghosts that we are talking about, who are behind and really telling them what to do and what not to do, obviously had their own agendas for Africa, their own agendas for the resources of Africa and so forth. So this is the convergence of interest. The corrupt leaders have their own interests, and their backers have their own interests. So there is this convergence of interest, and the people become sort of the victims of in all this. The second is, why is Eritrea involved in the war? Eritrea is interestingly, when it comes to Tigray, the leader of Eritrea has had grudges against the people of Tigray, and particularly the government of Tigray, for two reasons. One, when and after 91, the government of Ethiopia was formed. The new government was formed, and prior to that, the TPLF and the PLF have had tactical relationships. They've had their own ideological differences for many years, but at least on a tactical front, they had common enemies, so they had to cooperate, and they had cooperated. And both people had sacrifices at the expense of the other people as well. So when the government was formed, there was what you say an informal sort of relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. The motive behind the Eritrean government, or particularly Isaias, was that Ethiopia was going to be an Ethiopia that he's going to exploit. He's going to exploit for resources, natural resources. In fact, I remember in 1991 there was a meeting that took place in Asmara, where about 64 papers were presented, and the theme of those papers was that Eritrea was going to be the Singapore of Africa. And this desire to be Singapore of Africa, their answer for how they are going to be that is that, well, they're going to we're going to get the resources from Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was going to be the dumping ground for their commodities. So Eritrea was going to be an industrial country, and Ethiopia was just going to be sort of the feeder of the Eritrean industry. And that's why when TPLF, in its very reconstruction of Tigray's effort, when the textile factory in Adwa was built, the Eritreans were very angry. They said, "Why do you need a textile? We have a textile in Asmara, so you can invest there if you like. But why? This will be a competition." When Mosobo cement factory was built, they were adamant. They were opposed to it. They said, "We have a cement factory in Massawa. Why should you have a? If you want, you can invest in Massawa, and we can both have the sort of derive from the investment." So when Ethiopia decided to have a formal relationship, and a ministerial commission was established, the bilateral ministerial commission that Tamrat Line used to head. In this commission, it was to clarify and really establish this formal relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And he was unhappy. He was very unhappy, because that meant that this formal relationship will devoued him of his ability to exploit Ethiopia. So he had that grudge. So the reason for the war in 1998 of the Ethio-Eritrean War has nothing to do with border. It simply had because of his inability to exploit Ethiopia. Period. And he waged war at that time. Unfortunately, the war did not uh, bring about the desired consequences for him. He bragged about it that he's going to, get to Addis Ababa in no days, in no time. And when he was handedly defeated, then he felt that the cause for his embarrassment was the TPLF and the people of Tigray. So he had his second grudge. In the last 20 years of policy, a no peace and war policy, even though it has equally bad consequences to us, he was also unable to bring his country to a level of economic development that Ethiopia is taking place. And he blamed Tigray for that. Rather than blaming his own failed policies, he actually blamed the people of Tigray and the government of Tigray. So those are the two motivating factors, in addition to his, of course, his desire to be the policeman of the region. Those are the two grudges that actually, and you can see the viciousness of the attack. It was to really make Tigray pay for those his perception of embarrassment. That is the reason, and you see the viciousness. I mean, he's actually entirely was out to destroy the infrastructure of Tigray because he wants to make sure that Tigray does not revive, or that Tigray that has become a symbol of economic development compared to Eritrea will remain as a backward country.
So, I want to stay on that topic for a sec. I'm baffled. The description that you gave, obviously, I think even most Eritreans now understand it. Back then, I remember not only they did not understand it, but Eritrean communities in the diaspora were contributing like 2% of their salary to fund the Isaias Afwerki's mercenaries. We know today Eritreans, by far the majority abroad and at home, not only they don't support Isaias, but they want him to be gone. But they also know to remove him from power, it requires more skilled military people in Eritrea. And I remember when he bragged how he has dug his defense in Badme and other part of Ethiopia in 1998. I remember the war actually in 1999 was my first visit to Ethiopia ever since I left as a child. And I remember when I traveled throughout Tigray, I can hear actually the fighting in the border at that time. But I also remember some of the leadership within the EPRDF at the time when Meles Zenawi was a prime minister, and one of them actually is Sia Abraham. That when there was a discussion and a dispute, that Meles was slow to respond into the 1998 war, and there was some sort of fraction and fragmentation within EPRDF at that time. But regardless, the war was declared by Eritrea. The U.S., Liberia, and other nations have asked Eritrea to pull its troops and not go to war with Ethiopia, which is he bragged, saying that his military getting forced, through military defeat from Badme meant that the sun would never come. When the sun sets, it will never rise. He said it in Tigrinya, but I'm saying it in English for our audience, for the purpose of our audience. That being said, correct me if I'm wrong, we were 60K from, we mean the Ethiopian military was within 60 kilometers from capturing Asmara at that time. Do you think that was a mistake for the Eritrean, the Ethiopian troops not being allowed to go in and just get rid of him because he declared war on us?
First of all, it will be a mistake to go back and second guess the leadership at the time. There are international rules and regulations that prohibit you from going into another country and invade another country. Beyond that, 5 years after independence, 8 years or 9 years after independence, Eritreans fought for over 30 years for independence. To go back and try to invade Eritrea would have even more serious consequences than it would have achieved otherwise. One, the Eritrean people at the time would obviously see it as a colonizing force, and definitely we would have been in a cycle of violence that would not have an end. So having said that, without privy to all the detailed informations, it's probably not a good idea to second guess. However, we were able to defeat because we had the cause. We were right. We were the aggrieved. We were the ones that were invaded, and that is the one that drove us to defeat him. Isaias had an exaggerated sense of importance. He thought he was the most powerful army. He thought he had the most powerful army, as many of Eritreans actually also believed that it was an invincible party, an invincible army that cannot be defeated. So the fact that he was defeated basically had a serious psychological effect on Isaias, period. As to what Eritreans will do and not will do, Eritreans will, the reason we are able to withstand 500,000 people in the last 60 days is because we rely on our people, we rely on our unity, we rely on our cause. So Eritreans, if they were to achieve any level of change, it would have to come from them. They will have to unify themselves. They will have to dedicate to the cause, because there is no country as that had perhaps the opportunity to grow, because Eritreans were a very resourceful people. Eritreans are people who really care about their country. Unfortunately, Isaias was not able to utilize this. I was not able to galvanize the people into. So in time, I think they will. And the fact that there is a huge fracture within the Eritrean community not to unify against Isaias is what gave him the currency to live, to stay this long anyway.
Well, he actually, he crashed the many talented Eritreans who I personally know some were very, Eritreans were very well educated and very well set financially. And you mentioned about, I remember when he said that Eritrea was going to turn into Singapore-like Africa, the youngest African nation back then. Instead, what Eritreans got was 30 years of dictatorship, 30 years of horror to see their citizens dispersed throughout the world. At one point, Eritrea became the #1 in the world in refugee crisis. We've seen Eritreans bodies floating in the Mediterranean Sea, through Libya, being beheaded. We had what, around 100,000 roughly refugees in Tigray. We also have non-refugee Eritreans throughout Tigray that have lived side by side with the people of Tigray. And I think I agree with you that I don't think the Eritreans at the time would accept the overthrowing government at the time. They perceived him as their god, to be honest with you. I do, however, wish that, because Ethiopia at the time did not declare war to Eritrea, that I wish that, of course, it can't do it, but they have finished the job and got rid of him and let the Eritreans rebuild their country and choose their own leader. Because, I agree with you everything except the area where, I'm not trying to challenge you, but I would defer my opinion is, I don't think Ethiopia would have been perceived as an invader in technicality, because we were actually invaded by his mercenaries, and so we have not only right to defend ourselves, but right to, it was war. We were fighting a war that he opened up, thinking kind of what you say. I mean, he was bragging how powerful his military apparatus were, how much defense he had. So I appreciate the perspective, but we have other areas that I really want us to cover, which, so 30 years uh, of dictatorship in Eritrea, 30 years of suffering. And when I say 30, I'm talking since Isaias
Came to power.
came to power.
1991, yeah.
Right, close to 30 years, a little bit, about a year shorter than that. But they also have, suffered 30 years prior when they were fighter. And you mentioned earlier, the Eritrean Liberation Front and the Tigray People Liberation Front. I remember when I left home during the night, how we used to get help by the military from Tigray and Eritrea, because they were working side by side. But then there was the uh, disagreements. I remember like areas where they would fight the Derg military, and then they would have disagreements on weapons, who gets to split them and how they get to take them. And then you had the time where they actually they were pushing for blockage of those from Tigray enter into Sudan. And in fact, I personally experienced that. So, but they overcame that. They figured out at that time, fighting within each other militarily, they knew that it would have been a mistake. The Tigray Liberation Front, which formed into the PRDF that we talked about, um, it took 17 years to overthrow Mengistu. Eritrea had 13 years guerrilla fighters before TPLF actually was formed. But when they merged together, when they worked together, they were able to achieve the process. Now, Isaias, the grudges that he have held, the anger that that he's going to take with him to his grave, with thick blood in his hand of his own people and the Tigray people, how is he able to convince to Abiy Ahmed to declare war on Tigray, to create crisis in East Africa? And what is Isaias's motive now? He's moving troops to the border with Sudan, and we know Sudan is now taken a land that it says that it belongs to it since the 1902 is what they claim, that it was taken from Sudan. So the Amhara, I'm like lumping a lot of questions here at you, but so so let's do this. What how, do you think it's because of the political immaturity of Abiy Ahmed that he went with Isaias, and Isaias's advice fooled him enough that he was that foolish to really attack Tigray, the very people that supported him 100%, even though they didn't agree with everything, that they say, we will open space. You mentioned earlier, they left, the Tigray leadership actually left Addis Ababa and say, you know what, we're going to go to Tigray. We're going to actually help, our people to focus on our region. We are going to, so they actually opened up a space. So how delusional was Abiy Ahmed to go to Isaias, look up to him as his father, and create crisis that now is turning into regional war, not just Tigray, Ethiopia, but Tigray involved, Eritrea involvement in Tigray, and Sudan now is fighting with Amhara militia, and now I also hear that young Tagaru in Mekelle and surrounding area are being rounded up to be sent to the Sudanese Amhara border to fight the Sudanese army. How true that is, it's fact based that people we have in the ground in the region that have stated that basically they've seen young people getting rounded up.
Well, why would Abiy ally himself with Isaias? I think more rather than political, the answer would be best described by psychologists for that matter. No country, 110 million, a country of 110 million, a person who leads a country of 100 million, a country that has probably many hundred times of economy than Isaias. A country that probably has a much more sophisticated defense that has been built in the last 30 years, in the last 27 years. Why would anybody with that capacity become a stooge to Isaias? Unless you really have basically a very inferiority complex, so to speak. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It's a betrayal of a country. Even when you are good friends, you don't allow your adversaries, and we still haven't resolved our problem with Eritrea. No peace has been signed. No documents has been signed. So why would anybody that we consider to be an adversary allow him to visit the most sensitive areas? Allow him to have his military and your military incorporated together, unless Abiy's political wisdom has always been suspicious to begin with, but also the forces behind him, the forces that earlier when I was talking about the unitary state, the elite particularly that desires the unitary state to replace the current one or bring it back to what it used to be, and they are behind him, and he thinks with Isaias, with the unitary desirers, that he can prolong his power. Abiy is not interested in the welfare of the country. Abiy is unfortunately we have a president in this country that also everything centers around him, and they are similar. They actually are focused in their own pursuit of power. So they would sleep in bed even with the enemy. It doesn't matter. So he does not. It's not really within the normal political analysis that one can describe what transpired Abiy to become a stooge, so to speak. Even his demeanor tells it that way. Otherwise, there is no reason. Ethiopia is it's a big country. It's the most powerful country, most populous, the second populous country in the world. I mean, in Africa. For you to surrender to Isaias's feeble machinations is just unbelievable. So, but there is just this convergence of interest. Now, both of them had one singular enemy that they consider that needs to get eliminated. And nothing else. At the end of the day, when all said and done, Isaias and the unitary powers in Addis will not be friends any longer. They won't be long for long. I mean, Isaias's desire are always to dismantle Ethiopia. And for anybody that actually cares about Ethiopia would know that. So, to tell you the truth, it's very difficult to say why Abiy would actually would be dictated by Isaias when it should have been the other way around.
Well, to that point, if Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea has achieved anything, the two things that I think that he has successfully achieved is massacred his own citizen for 30 years and put in Ethiopia into
Dismantling
crisis.
Ethiopia.
Correct.
Dismantling
Dismantle.
Ethiopia.
And I remember the coup Ethiopian opposition leader Lidatu Ayalo coming out publicly and saying it's a mistake for Abiy Ahmed to dance around with adversaries. I mean, he was very vocal about it, and he was talking how he would rather go to Mekelle and have a debate with Debretsion Mikhail, the Tigray president, and he said it in Amharic, and I'm going to focus on the topic in English, but he was discussing how he would never go to Asmara or allow adversaries come to Ethiopia, but he would always, at any moment, go to Mekelle, sit down, and have a discussion on the table. So when you have mature leaders like that from the Amhara, and of course, within the Oromo, they had very young and powerful politicians like Jawar that we saw, who is educated in the U.S. Before the war was declared against Tigray, I mean, he was cleaning up the top politicians that he knew at any time that an election is to be held in Ethiopia, that he has no chance to beat them. So my question for you is, do you think the Amharas are just that foolish to support Abiy Ahmed as a result? What's happening to their region now?
Let's first of all, let's qualify the statement that says Amharas in general. We're talking about the elite Amhara who have had a significant role in the Ethiopian political structure for very many years. Were instrumental in aggravating the political situations in Ethiopia. A political elite that has marginalized enormous number of people, the nations and nationalities at that. So the focus, the interests of this, and the interests of Isaias had converged in the interest, in the desire that this elite has against the regional state of Tigray and the people of Tigray for that matter, because they see them as a threat to achieve their desire of reinventing the unitary state. So let's do that, because when we're talking about people in general, then we go into a mired situation that we don't want to go.
Sure. So let me break it into three groups. Actually, excuse me. I don't. Let me interrupt you there for a sec. So, so I think to clarify, when you talk about the Amhara elite, so there you have a group who were in the Derg regime. He actually brought back, including the current general that is in charge of the Ethiopian military. Actually, was a general that was captured back then, and he's returned back to power, which is sad. But you also, I'm not seeing, the reason I'm saying Amhara, part of that is my, rage, the fact that I'm not seeing the Amharas coming out, being outraged. So when I say the Amhara, I think, we could have a little bit of a point of view differ there, but I saw in Washington, D.C., the Amhara diaspora, shortly after the genocide in my cadre opening champagne and celebrating. Now, do they represent all the diaspora? Do they represent all the Amhara? No. But when you see a large scale of them celebrating, I'm not seeing a large scale of Amhara coming out condoning what's happening.
No, you see, let's be very clear. First of all, we're not saying actually the average. You may not have an average average Amhara that will subscribe to this. We're not saying that. There is a possibility. But you look at the relationships, not in terms of how many people have they done this, or how many people have celebrated, or how many people do not celebrate, and so forth. But in the context of the people's ultimate desire would be what? What would an average Amhara benefit from the misgivings that are or the war that has been declared in Tigray? True sentiments can change. We're talking in terms of a class of people. We're simply saying the Amhara as a whole will not be enemies of our people to begin with. Yes, there are people that have celebrated. Yes, there are people who may even have celebrated, but because of their environment. Okay, if you look at the war, the genocide that took place in Uganda by the Hutus, there were also many Hutus that were killed because they did not subscribe to that. And then there are fears. You look in Germany when the Holocaust took place, even though there was no uproar, there was no, people were not really celebrating because, or at least were not showing their sympathy to the Jews. There were a lot of people, because of the conditions, the environments, and so forth, that people would not speak up at that moment. That's not to say. Those sentiments are not there. Because of the propaganda, because of the media, because of many people believe, for instance, what Abi is saying. You were talking about the people that were recently arrested and killed, supposedly killed by Isaias. None of them were captured in the battlefield. None of them were captured. But and people will believe that that's the case because that's what the media has portrayed them to be. So there are people who just believe, and ideally you would want people to be rational, to be analytic, to be independent thinkers. That doesn't happen. I mean, reality is that. But and in the true political sense, we do not say an entire Amhara is enemy of Tigrayans, or vice versa, for that matter. And our people have shown the true sentiments of a people when after 17 years of war, we did not go out and massacre the Amharas because we felt the leadership in the Derg or Haile Selassie times were Amharas. We don't do that, and that's the right thing to do. And we hope people will learn from their lessons. But having said that, however, definitely we need to ascribe where the responsibilities are. The responsibilities for this are really squarely in the hands of the elite and their supporters, for that matter.
I appreciate that. I had a fellow Eritrean the other day that I interviewed here, Dawit, who goes by Captain Eritrea, who served 24 years in the U.S. Armed Forces, and he spoke just very well, same way you say it. I think it helps for me to be able to get to overcome. I'm just I saw the betrayal of my people, our people, and as a child, I remember when the Derg soldiers used to say, like, degrade like us as young children, calling us Tigray, Kamala. There's like a number of things that were so negative, just like in America. I've been involved heavily with BLM, Black Lives Matter. And when I hear, like, people degrading that, or talking how, that they would get offended, like, well, if you say Black Lives Matter, my life doesn't matter. That's not what we're saying. But my point here is that I was born in an era where the Amharas perceived Eritreans and Tagaros beneath their shoes. And I thought we overcame all of that. And then when the war in Tigray was declared, when I saw the celebration in Washington, D.C., when 20 to 30 Amharas that I knew personally, in person, as well as some extra beyond those numbers on Facebook, we have to, like, I mean, literally, I saw them, like, basically saying, oh, this is like a word declared by Tigray on Ethiopia. So the Ethiopian prime minister or the government has to do this and that. The delusional aspect, I get it. It's like the Republicans listen to one station in America for the most part, which is Fox News, that passes on like false narratives, and they refuse to hear fact-based reports. So I think, I appreciate you correcting me. So I
No, no.
will be.
I'll tell you what. You see, I'm correcting myself, by the way. It's not because I don't feel the same sentiment that you do. I do. When in the heat of anger, that's what you feel. When during the Ethio-Eritrean war, we were angry at our Eritrean brothers for supporting Isaias. All right, and there were a group of Eritreans who were calling us names, but that is in the heat of anger. But when you sit down and rationalize, then it's a different story, because it just becomes the same here, as you understand. And you rightly said, you corrected it yourself. I didn't correct you well, but you corrected it yourself by saying, I understand. Here, there are white people who say, when you say Black Lives Matter, they would consider it to mean that their lives don't matter. But that's not what's being said. That is not to say, it's not diminishing the white people. It's actually expressing the injustices that's taking place in black communities.
Sure. So I think, and thank you. I think my struggle to accept, I keep focusing on the Amhara, is, see, I grew up with a lot of them. The same is true with Eritreans. When Ethiopia and Eritrea fought war, most of, if not actually every one of my Eritrean friends that I was friend with before the war, during the war, and after the war,
Abandoned you.
we stay friends.
Oh, you did? Okay.
During the fighting, we, we were young, so the older generation, yeah, we saw the fight and stuff, but those of us who, knew what was happening, I think we were not, I guess, maybe politically deeply involved as much as like our families were, and so we remain as friends. And I think for me, I reached out to a few of my Amhara friends, like, shortly after the bombings and stuff, and actually within about 10 days or so, I said, hey, the very least that I expected from you as a friend is to call and say, hey, how are your family? Have you heard from them? What's happening is really terrible, and we are praying for you. Nothing. Instead, I had a few of them. They literally argue their tongue out on me. So I don't want to kill time on that. I appreciate it. I think I'm still going to take it from you, as you are teaching me a lesson that I want to learn. And
but Mike, um, I grew up most of my life in Addis. I would say probably 70% of my friends are as Amharas. Were, actually, I should say, because it's not I have abandoned them, but they have abandoned me. They have not. They have abandoned me not because they didn't call and say, "How are you?" but because they didn't care when kids were killed. I don't care about their politics. Their politics is fine. I can deal with it.
right.
when one becomes insensitive to the destruction, to the death, to the misery, and you don't say anything, then that I have a problem with.
And that's exactly
That,
it. Thank you. So that was
that
the difference that I witnessed between Ethiopia Eritrea war and today's war is that, like as I said, most of us, we were sad what was happening, but we refused to fight one another. But today we are actually far advanced in technology. Information is flowing through the tip of our fingers with, Twitter's, Facebook, and so many other things I can talk about. Seeing that, having that, they still are saying, when he said not a single civilian has died in Tigray by the federal forces,
Mike,
and they took.
Mike, 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 listen. Uh, today there are over out of the 71 million people that voted Trump, a good percentage of them believe, you know, Trump won. Social media says it. There are this alternative medias that you watch. There are alternative informations, alternative ideas. So if you want to believe what you see, unless you are an intelligent person like yourself who actually looks at things from a various perspective, hey, this country was the most probably I idealized this country as a democratic country. I still do, but not to the extent that you see today. Our perception of democracy of America was this intolerance, is tolerance, this people disagreeing and yet living together and so forth. But that now we're looking at the level of intolerance that you're seeing here because social media plays negatively in some areas. So there is blames to be to go around, but definitely there is what I've always quoted when I uh, when I talk to my friends. I don't haven't talked to them, but when I've written it, at the end of it, it says, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Okay, so that's that will be our lessons from this experience. We will not forget it. We'll forgive, but we will not forget it.
Correct. And hopefully we will in due time, we'll overcome to that emotions that we are dealing with, including myself right now.
Oh,
Uh,
definitely,
I feel
definitely.
like rightfully so that I'm hurt. I am bothered
Oh,
by the lack of support by the Amharas to rise up for humanity, um, regardless of who to be blamed politically. I think from humanitarian crisis perspective, I have to still focus on my fellow Eritreans who actually now today are coming to my comfort, are actually financially, raising money to help the refugees from Tigray. So I'll move on from that. I appreciate you uh, able to just make me understand better. And I think um, the crisis that we're talking about is now involved in other players. So we have not quite yet, but there's internal discussions and chats that I've been following that Kenya might also get involved in potential grabbing borderland. We don't know how true that would be, but let's just focus on the areas where there's a vacuumed open in Somalia, Al-Shabaab. You have Sudan, as we know, they're currently fighting in the Amhara region, which actually is what I touch bases about the potential bringing Tagaru, innocent civilians that are young men that are getting rounded up now to fight with Sudan to create potentially um, conflict between the Tigray people and the Sudanese people, which we have had an amazing relationship with Sudan. During the Derg, they sheltered us. During today's dictator regime, they're sheltering our people. So the actors in this is that the failures of Abiy Ahmed has opened one of the, in my opinion, this is going to be one of the biggest political failure in East Africa. How do you see it?
Well, the political pundits has been saying all along, most of us have said, if Abiy continues in the direction he's going, not only there is a political cost for him, but also there is a political cost for Ethiopia. Ethiopia will be on the verge of disintegration. That not only Ethiopia will be on the verge of disintegration because of its imploding, but also there will be regional consequences to it. That's what we have been saying to the international community, is to say that the problem is larger than what could happen. It will have a disastrous effect in the region as a whole, and we're looking at it now. Okay, there was harmony, so to speak, in the region, in the Horn of Africa, or even for that matter, in that periphery. Harmony in a sense of being able to solve your differences in the diplomatic field, in the African Union, in IGAD, and there were those commitments. There were commitment to the safety of each other, to the security of each other. That's why Ethiopia was one of the largest contributors of UN peacekeeping force, because Ethiopia was committed to resolving its problems with other countries, and also being instrumental in the security of other countries. So, that takes skill, that takes commitment, that takes know-how. Without that, then obviously this is what you're going to have. Now, everybody knew the moment that Abiy was undermining the federal system, that Ethiopia was going to be in the verge of the disintegration. It will implode. That is clear. That was clear, because what binded people that were probably second-class citizens until 1991, and many of their that binded together was the constitution. That binded together was the multi-ethnic federal system. Once you break that, then there is nothing to bind them, because nobody wants to go back to what they were before. No one of the nationalities want to become a second-class citizen in their own country. So obviously that was going to happen. Every political analyst would say that. And yet the second is that the crisis would actually even further go and affect the region as a whole. That is what we are looking at today. And Sudan and Ethiopia were able, for the last 25 years, by the way, Sudan and Ethiopia were able to talk about peacefully resolving the border issue. And the border issue was left, it's the only thing that was left is actually demarcating it, delimiting it, period. Otherwise, it's understood this land was a Sudanese land. All right? Now, the people that were in this territory, were Ethiopians. With the skillful negotiation and understanding of the Sudanese people, that these people were allowed to live there. Now, living there and working there does not allow you ownership. So today, Sudan sees an opportunity in this crisis. Sees an opportunity. This is a time to achieve what Sudan has been trying to do this peacefully. So today, it cannot achieve it peacefully. The only way it can achieve it is through the 3 years. By doing so, Ethiopia invited Eritrea. Eritrea publicly has said it will support Ethiopia in the war against Sudan. All right? Obviously, Egypt are going to be involved, because there is a historic relationship between Egypt and Sudan. So now you have even more crises that will engulf the area. Okay, and it may have an endless and one one cannot sit here and really and look what is going to happen in any near future, because we don't know. The crisis is multiplying, the crisis is evolving, the crisis is having various actors. So this is it. Look at what happened with the UAE. UAE had no business in involving in this war, but it did. And when you do that, then it has consequences to be paid. There are other it will have its own political genesis. So and this was expected, and that's exactly what's happening today.
And to point to that, Egypt is a member of the Arab League, which complicates things even further, because as member of the Arab League, now you're going to have potentially a tension out there, but we're going to leave that out for another day.
Another day, yes.
And so, because I'd like you to come back again another time. So the, you mentioned about Sudan taking opportunity, but isn't that the failures of Abiy Ahmed creating the vacuum by deploying every military personnel to capture the Tigray leadership that was democratically elected by 2.7 million people in Tigray, and that he told the world within 3 days he was just going to bring them? And I think you mentioned earlier, you say we have a leader in this country. Which country that you're referring to? I'm going to be blunt. We're referring to the United States of America, and I'm talking about Donald Trump, how much he has lied for the last 4 years, and he continues to lie today. And you know what? I honestly thought that Donald Trump was the biggest liar in the world, but Abiy Ahmed actually has won in that. So rather than giving the Nobel Peace Prize, I think that could be taken back and retitling that. But what?
But you're saying, actually, indeed, you see, when he claimed victory at the parliament, victory against the regional state of Tigray, as we all know, falsely declared that. The first thing he said was actually that we had destroyed the military hardware.
I remember that
70% of the military hardware that was of Ethiopia was in Tigray, and we had destroyed it. I mean, if I were an enemy of Ethiopia, I will be celebrating at that, because you're telling me you are weak enough to withstand any attempt I may have had. So did Abiy encourage it by practice, by design, by what he has done? Yeah, he has every reason that we can ascribe as because of him, nothing else. The crisis in Ethiopia could be averted a long time ago. It reaches, I mean, the regional government of Tigray only demanded a peaceful resolution. It demanded the application of the constitution, and all you had to do is just negotiate. But negotiating would have meant that he would have failed. Negotiating would have meant it will be an election, and the election will have resulted in his loss. So he has no intention. He had no intention of doing this, and he is spiraling the crisis and multiplying it by the day. And that's exactly what was expected, and that's exactly what's happening. I mean, if he thought if he thought for a moment that he could win in Tigray, then right there he tells you what his scope of intelligence is, what his scope of history is, what is his scope of politics is. So here is a leader who does not really to truly understand the politics of the country, the history of the country at all. So now he has immersed it into a quagmire.
So do you think the Ethiopian generals involved in this war, siding, going along with the order by the that prime minister who is no longer prime minister? You think they have not only committed genocide, but you think they will be held accountable?
They should. I mean, that's what we're working for. They're every person that is responsible for this destruction, for this loss of life, for this. By the way, the war crimes simply means if you target civilian population, that is war crime. If you loot, that is war crime. If you uh, destroy infrastructures, that is war crimes. So right there, that's it. And in terms of genocide, look what's happening in place. There are rapes of our women. Children have been killed. Adults and elder people have been massacred. So there are every responsible. This government is responsible for everything that has happened in Tigray, and will be accountable. It will have to be accountable, and I guarantee you, it will be accountable. And not only just one person, but everybody that is responsible in this war will be accountable.
Well, I know some of them, from what I hear, some of the generals already been either captured or killed throughout the fight, actually. So I'm talking actually chain of command. Those who, whether they lead 300 army or 10,000 army, I'm talking from up and down. So my next question for you is, before I ask a question, I want to make a comment. Eritrean by far are disgusted by the looting of the Eritrean military and the killings of civilians in Tigray. It has been reported numerous times that the goods that are looted from Tigray has been in the streets of Asmara on the streets to sell, and many church dignitarians and decent Eritreans are telling fellow Eritreans to please not buy those goods that were stolen. So my question for you is, who's going to hold the Eritrean leader and the military accountable for their massacres and for the looting of the infrastructure that took 30 years to organize and to put together, the schools, churches? Just a couple days ago, I saw one of the mosques was actually bombed. So we're talking the attack isn't just on civilians; it's also on infrastructure, private sectors, government, regional government-owned properties, um,
Religious institutions.
right? And they're still hiding. They think they're going to hide this from the world for the time being. Maybe they're not even able to control fully, right? Even as we speak. So the question is, who's going to hold Eritrea accountable?
We are.
Okay.
Our people are. We're going to make them accountable by every avenue we have, whether it's legal, whether it's political, whether military, in any fashion. They're going to, the properties that were stolen are going to be brought back. They are going to be responsible. The government is responsible for the death. The government is responsible for the destruction. The government is going to be. By the way, you have said it rightly so. I think the religious leaders in Eritrea have asked the public not to engage in the purchase of any material that was brought from Tigray. They have said that. They have implored their people. Communities have said, though. Even ordinary people have said they have refused not to buy this materials. So we don't hold Eritrean people responsible for this. We hold the Eritrean government responsible, and the Isaias government at that. Not even we're not even talking about the EPLF or the Eritrean people at all. We are actually referring to the Isaias government, and that government is going to pay the price for it.
Well, and I think to your point, many Eritreans, even abroad, are condemning that they do not support the looting. They do not support the massacre. It's actually refreshing, to see, and that's kind of why I mentioned earlier, like, where are the Amharas that needs to like wake up and really, focus on the humanitarian crisis? Because if they support Abiy Ahmed politically, that's fine, but we also know that politically, Abiy Ahmed dismantled the very party that put him in power, create his own party, and want to turn Ethiopia back into what Mengistu had tried and failed, which is creating one party for a population 110 million plus, for a country that you know way more than I do, but I believe we have more than 80 different ethnics and more than 87 different languages. Those are my roughly estimated from what I hear from people, from what I follow in social media. Um, when people had enjoyed their ability to speak their tongue. When we say tribal languages, by the way, we're not talking 100 or 1,000 people. We're like talking about millions of people that have
We're talking
regional.
about ethnic people that are.
Correct. So the failure of the Abiy leadership, the lack thereof, has destroyed Tigray today. The Oromo fighters are now waging war. So the tension is domestically, that I'd like to just touch bases real quickly. It doesn't look good. How are we going to come together? How are we going to solve? First and foremost, how are we going to stop the war on civilians in Tigray? And how are we going to help the people who have made it, the ones who have been taken? Sadly, we can't bring them back. The properties, we can do the legal action, political action, and all of those things, or for that matter, the young generation I've been talking, actually, to be honest with you, are convinced that we will go back to Tigray. We will show the world what happened to Tigray, and the world actually would side with us, and we would actually rebuild it. To be honest with you, we're not, like, many of us aren't even interested in political fight, military fight with Eritrea. We are actually more interested in stopping the fighting right now, stopping more of the massacre, but the suffering that's happening today and tomorrow. When the dictator is removed from office, the rest of Ethiopia can decide whatever it wants to do. But in the meantime, we are actually eagerly wanting to go back and show the world what happened. And through fundings and whatever means, that we actually are eager to rebuild Tigray. So the property loss, the damage is created. Personally, from myself included and many young people that I've been talking to, we are actually more than motivated that we will make it happen, because blessing to technology, I think that is my least concern about property and things that have happened. It's sad that have happened, but the question is, how are we going to bring the people back together, where you are now seeing actually the ethnic division is going on, I mean, literally on all out war.
First of all, let me preface this by saying that the Abiy has placed the majority of its military against the people of Tigray, because he believed it is a strong region. It has a strong people, a unified people. So it's not it wasn't easy, or it wasn't going to be easy to diminish the power that was bestowed by the people to the regional government. That's what he has done in Somalia. That's what he has done in Afar. That's what he has done in southern people's nations. He knew he wasn't able to do that. That's why he had to ally with the Eritrean government, allied with the Amhara militias and the regional force. That's why he had to ally with some of his allies. That's why he has to ally with the UAE. and because it required that much of a force to subdue Tigray, and even then it was unable to do it. But what has happened in Ethiopia in the last 3 years is an unbelievably destructive. I mean, there is not a single nationality that has not uh, received a brunt of destruction, a brunt of death, uh, and including the people that we said had celebrated when what has happened to us. So, I mean, the level may be different, but there has been a humongous destruction in the country as well. Economy is now in shambles. Today, I was told $1 is about 53 birr in black markets in Addis. World Bank said it expects Ethiopia to grow below zero percentage. And last year and this year, it has actually registered a 1.7 GDP growth, and it's expected to. Investment has diminished. Foreign direct investment has essentially dried up. So the level of destruction is just unbelievable. It has happened. Now, the political side of it, then our focus now is Tigray. We are the people of Tigray that we're focused on. In time, where we go from here, there's plenty of time for us to decide who we ally with or who we don't ally with. Has plenty of time to decide. The focus now is really saving the people, be a spokespersons for our people in diaspora, and share and do our share of responsibilities. I agree with you, by the way. Whatever was lost, when I said we're going to bring it back, it doesn't mean that in a literal sense of the term. We may even bring some of it, but the fact that it's going to take so much time to rebuild it, to rebuild to where, even to get to where we were 4 months ago, is going to take a long time. So that's where our people, our young people like you, who are energized, can make that rehabilitation quicker, bring the reconstruction faster. Yes, and we're going to rely on our resources, on our intellect, on our young people particularly, and our capacity to adapt to technology. We're going to do that, and those are the ones that we rely upon. Even now, in times of crisis, we're looking at innovations. How do we innovate in a time of war? How do we innovate in terms of so yes, and then at the beginning of my interview with you, I've said, what gives me a sense of comfort is that knowing people like you are energized, are taking the mantles of responsibilities from those of us that were maybe not even done it as good as we should have done. I really believe in the youth. I really believe in the young people, and I think the young people are our salvage.
That's very kind of you. To that point, one of the things that I have been moved by is the young and those who have a massive political experience and understands the geopolitics back home. I have never seen this much unity in the past. Why do you think we're so united? I know, I mean, I kind of know it, but can you, to the younger generation, can you explain from your own experience and why we're working together so well?
Here is here is where the unique character of a Tigrayan comes. in times of adversity, there is nothing that separates us. We unify, and that's how has been our history. That's not to suggest that we become complacent when things are good, but we learn, and that's where our strength is. That's why our heroism comes from. It's not because we were born by DNA we have the unique heroism. It's because we have learned to be heroes from our colleagues, from our parents, from our relatives, from our youth. We have learned to do that. In fact, I usually say, I make this parallel between the Tigrayans and an unfair parallel maybe, but the Jews, for instance. In the Jewish community, people say a Jew needs an enemy to survive. All right? And that's because Jews have been persecuted. They have been targets in their histories. And this keeps their resilience alive. And that's been the case in our case as well. So much so we have sacrificed for Ethiopia. Every single war in Ethiopia was fought in Tigray. Every single war of it. We have paid lives, 60,000 lives in recent years, and 100,000 of our youth that were handicapped. For what reason? Not only just to liberate ourselves, but also to liberate the country that we thought we belong to, that we can live freely, and that we can share the desire to live together with the rest of others that were equally harmed by the previous governments. So we have learned to be together. We have had our share of complacency in the past 25 years, but this brings us together, and that's what the unique character of ours is, that we never compromise on our Tigrayanness. We never compromised on our unity, on our area, on our region, on our people. So I think there is that patriotic DNA within us.
I think there's no doubt, there's no question, patriotism in Tigray is what have given the strength and the will for the massive Eritrean military, the massive Amhara militia, the massive federal troops that have came thinking with delusional mind that they were just gonna walk right up to Tigray, walk right up to Mekelle, and just arrest leaders of the region. And they have what we call them in our own language, bandas, handpicked to run the regional state of Tigray, which it's obviously a big mistake. And 60 plus days later, I am yet to see a single leader of the Tigray people in the fight, in the battleground of fight in the war, to be arrested, to be killed. Instead, Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia is going after retired military veterans of Tigray ethnic, Tigrayans, and bragging how he just killed so many of them recently. So while I'm very optimistic and hopeful with the young Tagaru around the world that are ready to rebuild Tigray, I'm also equally concerned and terrified, for that matter, what the mercenaries of Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki are doing to civilians. And I'm going to shift the gear for a sec. You know, his wife and children actually lives here in the United States, Denver, Colorado. She attends a Pentecostal church. If she has human heart, why isn't she coming out publicly and saying, this is not against my belief? No child, no mother should be killed. No woman, no young girl should be raped. Do you think that would help us to?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, first of all, it's too much to expect, and then I don't think a single person's confession will do anything. I'll tell you what. Uh, this is not just a problem between Abiy and the people of Tigray. This is a war between forces allied with Abiy, who had not slept for the past 20 something years, who want to turn the clock back. So it's against forces that are out to destroy what was achieved in the last 27 years. So the lamentation of a single woman or a single man is not going to do anything. It will not repair. It will not mean anything. It's inconsequential to begin with. Now, what should happen is to is right now we feel the solution is in our hands. We have courageous military and political leaders, skillful at that. We have people that are unbending. We have the spirit of our colleagues, our brothers and sisters and parents and so forth. And that's what is going to drive this. And that's what has, in the last 60 days, that's what we have seen. This heroism, that every single incident. I mean, when the stories are told tomorrow, you will see how many heroes we've had. We had, it's just unbelievable. One person who actually stands against a number of soldiers in Europe, for instance. A single person that has actually brought about a few hundred of his friends, a few friends of his, and that has actually resisted the military might of Eritrea in that section. We have heroes. We have heroes, young heroes in Mekelle that protected the Eider hospitals. We have priests that have protected their own churches. We have people that, so the heroism that I talk about is manifested today. So we see it. So that is what is going to drive us to victory, and that's what they're going to drive us to the same heroism is going to drive us to reconstructing and rebuilding our country.
I'd hope that. So I want to hear from you to the young Tagaru who some of them have actually reached out to me privately. Feel that they're doing an amazing job, but they often feel left out because, particularly those who were born in Addis, grew up speaking Amharic, but they know their DNA, they know their history very well, which we know that every Tigray or anyone originated from Tigray. So they have been saying, hey, we feel like we're motivated to participate in protests, which I would like you also to cover the protests we have coming up January, 2 of them back to back that we're going to have. But I would like you to share with the young Tagaros out there who, by no fault of their own, have been born and raised outside Tigray, whether it be in Europe, North America, South America, Australia, and and Addis. What could you say to them to keep them uplifting and to keep them hopeful?
Well, they're doing it, by the way. You see their campaigns in the demonstrations, their campaigns in Twitter, their campaigns in social media, their campaigns in mainstream medias. They are doing it now. If there is anyone that feels left out because he does not speak Tigrinya, uh, it's not his problem. It's the problem, like us, who speak Tigrinya, that if we're not welcoming you and we're not embracing you, then I think we have failed. It's no fault of yours. If you don't speak Tigrinya and you only speak English, and we haven't embraced you, it's a fault of ours, not yours. Uh, and uh, and many parents have done well. They have engaged their children. The children are what they are today because of their parents, and we have to admire the commitment of the parents in difficult situation in this country that have brought about such enormous young people, young leaders for that matter. They are leaders, and so don't feel left out for any reason. If it's a language barrier, don't worry about it. It's Tigray accommodates everyone. Tigray, much less its children, it accommodates even others. That has been our mantra. That has been our character. So as young people, we are proud. By the way, I speak of my generation when I say I am actually amazingly comforted, and I'm amazingly happy to see that so much young people have now are engaged. That just takes away my breath. I'm indeed honored, really, to have been in a company of such young people to begin with. So you're doing good. You're doing the right things. If there are people that haven't involved, to get involved. There is always room for you guys. There is always for someone to be involved, whether it is in social media, whether it's in reconstructing your country. You can plan, by the way. This is not going to be long. We'll have our region back to its normalcy in no time. So I suggest you plan for it. You plan for the reconstruction. You plan for engaging in the process of that. So so there is plenty to be done, and I'm proud to say that you are doing it and continue to do so.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to make a quick comments, and then I'm going to ask you summarizing questions to finish our segment. So for those of you who've been listening to Cyber Power of Tigray, our guest today, Mr. Mesfin, is deeply helping us to organize Tagaras with other um, fellow Tagaras throughout the United States and Canada. He's based in Washington, D.C. We've been in close contact with him and, of course, other amazing leaders of our community throughout the country in the United States, that is. A few weeks ago, um, he and others in Washington, D.C. were able to put together an open Tigray community office. Um, I believe we have a phone number we have established that is 1-833 Tigray 1. And
Tigray one.
Tigray 1, that's right. So that is 1-833 Tigray 1. And then the email that we have is tigraycenter@gmail.com. So anyone who's wanted to get involved and participate in what is happening, those are the information. He's also, Mr. Mesfin, is working with our teams in DC to put together protest that we have coming up on January 8th. That's going to be international, worldwide, that we're going to all get out and do protests simultaneously in our communities, wherever we are. And then we'll have another one followed by on January 22nd. That too will be internationally. And so for those of you who need to get involved, need to get a network with your communities, please participate at the local level, at the state level. And if you need guidance, those are the information that I share with you that you can network and communicate with us. We are obviously scrambling to, given what happened to the state of Tigray in Ethiopia, to the massacre and the continuous chokehold that's being put on the people of Tigray by unelected leader of Ethiopia and Eritrea's dictator deploying massive military to attack civilians and loot historical churches and mosques and name it all. So that being said, do you have anything else that you want to share with us? Is it possible for you to say something in Amharic and Tigrinya to those who has been tuned in, perhaps, which is a segment that I'd like to finish up with native language?
Oh, definitely. ነዞም መናሰይ ትግርኛ ትኽእሉ ብትገብርዎ ዘለኹም ንሕበን ንሕና ዞም ቁዱብ ዕድሜና ዝደፋና ድሕሪ እዚ ዝትክኡ ንቅድሚት ክመርሑ ዝኽእሉ መናእሰያት ምፍራዮም ይሕጉሰና ንዓኻትኩም ንቅድሚት መፂኹም ስራሕትታት ንኽትሰርሑ ዘኽእል ቁርባት ኢና ንሕግዘኩም ድሕሪ እዚ ሓገዝቲ ናታትኩም እምበር መራሕቲ ኢና ዝብሉታ ሰባት የብልናን ብሓገዝ ግን ብኩሉ መንገዲ ንሕግዘኩም ኢና for my compatriots who speak Amharic አማርኛ ብቻ መናገር የቻላችሁ አማርኛና እንግሊዝኛ ብቻ ለምትናገሩ ወጣቶች የምትሰሩትን ስራዎች እናደንቃለን አሁን በምታደርጉት ስራ አድናቆት ብቻ ሳይሆን የነገር መሪዎቻችን መሆናችሁን አሳይታችሁናል በዚህ እንድትበረቱ በዚህ ወደፊት እንድትገሰግሱ ለአሁን ለዚህ ለጦርነት ሳይሆን ወደፊት ሀገሪቷን እንደገና ለማንሰራራት የምትችሉትን ሁሉ እንድታደርጉ የሚያስችል አቅሙም ችሎታም ስላላችሁ ለዛም እንድትዘጋጁ ማድረግ ነው ለዚህ አመሰግናለሁ ሁላችሁንም ወጣቶቹን አመሰግናለሁ ለተሰጠኝ እድል በጣም አመሰግናለሁ ማይክ በጣም ህብረተሰብ ውስጥ ትልቅ ሮል እየተጫወታችሁ እንደሆነ ስለማቅ በጣም አክብሮት አለኝ አመሰግናለሁ
Thank you so much. I really I can't say enough and emphasize enough what it means to hear your support, your kind words to Tagaras across the United States of America, Canada, throughout the world for that matter. We know that there are listeners even inside Ethiopia. I do get occasional messages here and there. So I think in talking to you today, what I learned is how to heal, how to overcome challenges, how to understand and accept things even when they're painful. I think for me, the first war and this war has a huge impact personally. Not to say the second war with Eritrea doesn't, but I think the Eritrea-Tigray, the Ethiopia-Eritrea war that happened in 1998 did not have massive displacement outside the country. It was sustained within. But when I became a child refugee, the suffering and the pain and the death toll that I know of has brought me a trauma today. I don't have to really imagine. I understand how it feels when you go hungry for days, when you go thirsty for days, when you are cold for days, and you feel like helpless. So the sad reality is that what's happening today is senseless war. It's a war that should never happen. So to the listeners, to the young people, to our older generation, this is a repeated mistake by individuals of Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki who are terrorizing and destroying the people's will. And that is the sad reality. So with that, I typically, finish my segment in Tigrinya. So what I'm going to say in Tigrinya is, Ata Mesfin, لما ناوزي قريبهم حساباتنا أنا مردا እቲ ከመይ ጌርና ንሕና ተጋሩ ተሓባቢርና ብሓደ ኮይና ክንሰርሕ ከም ዘለና ጥራይ ዘይኮነ ንስኻትኩም ካባና ዝበለፀ ብዙሕ ሰሪሕኩም ንዓድና ንትግራይ በተለይ ናብ ፅቡቅ መገድታት ንክንከይድ ህዝብና ካብ ድኽነት ካብ ጥምየት ካብ ክፍኣት ተሰጊሩ ናብ ፅቡቅ ንክኣቱ ዝሰርሕሞ መገድታት ኣብቲ መንጎ መንጎ ዋላ እቶም ኣያታትና ኣብ ስልጣን ዝሃለው ቅድሚ ሕዝቢ ስልጣን ዝነበሩ ሲቪል ሰርቨንት ኮይንኩም ከም ንኸማኻ ዝሓገዝኩሞ ሃገር ኣብ መንጎ ዶክተር ደብረፅዮን ገብረሚካኤል ዝበልዎ ነይሩ ኣብ ስራሕ ዘሎ ሰብ ይስሓት እዩ ስራሕ ስለ ዝሓዘ ሓደ ነገር ከጥፍ እዩ ንሱ ኣይኮንና ጥራይ ክንርኢ ዘለና ዝሓለፈ ይኣኽለና ካብኡ ተማሂርና ሒዚ ተወሊዑና ዘሎ ሓዊ ብሓደ ከምዚ ኢልና ናተማያየጥና ናተረዳእና ተኸባቢርና ተሓቋቂፍና ብሓደ ንህዝብና ነብሲ ወከፍ ምትሳእና ኣነ ናይ መጨረሻ ካብ ልበይ ደስታይ ዋላ ሓዘን ግዜ እንተኾንና ዋላ ሃገርና ተወሊዑ እንዳሃለወይ እቶም ጀግናታት ኣሕዋትና ተሲኦም ፈቆዶ ጎቦታት ትግራይ ክንደይ ዝኣክል ናይ ኢሳያስ ወታደር ጨቢጠ ሕዛ እየነ ትግራይ ክዕንዎ እየነ ትግራይ ህዝቢ ትግራይ ክውድኦ እየ ኢሉ ሓሪኑ ዝሰደዶ እናተማረኸ ጀነራላቱ ዝተቐተሉ ተቐቲሎም ተማረኹ ተማሪኾም እታ ናይ ትግራይ መሬት ረመፅ ኮይና መቕበሪኦም እያ ዝኒሃሎም እንተኾነ እምበር ንሳቶም ዝዕንድሩላ ከም ዘይኮነት ብኣሕዋትና ንሕና ንኮርዐሉ ግዜ እዩ ዘሎ እዚ ድማ ናይ ሒዚ ዝኒሄ ፀልማት ዝኒሄ ክበርሀልና እዩ እዞም ባንዳታት ናይ ኣብይ ኣሕመድ ብኢድ ተመሪፆም መፂኦም መቐለ ንህዝብና ንትግራይ ክነመሓዳር ዝብሉ ዘለው እቶም ጀጋኑ ዝኔው ተመሊሶም ንኣኹም ኣይመረፅናን ኢሎም እዮም ሒዞሞም ዘለው ኣብ መንጉኡ ግን ምልሻ ነይሮም ከምዚ እናተባሃሉ ዝርሸኑ ኣለው እዮም ስለዚዩ ኣብ ዓለም ዘለኹም ተጋሩ ኣየኹም ኣብ ጎንኹም ተሲእና ብዓቕምና ብሶሻል ሚድያ ብፖለቲካ ብገንዘብ መወፃእ ሓረይና ተሲእና ንትግራይ ከንቁር ዓይኒ ዝመፀ መሊስና ንሳቶም ዓይኖም ነቑሮም ንድሕሪት ጥራይ ዘይኮነ ረመፅ ኮይና ትግራይ ሓዊ እያ እምበር እታ ናይ ጎቦታት መሬት ትግራይ ናይ ኣየታትና ዓፅሚ ንሳቶም ክረግፅዋ ኣይኽእልን እዮም ናይ መዓት ንብረታት ዝጠፍአ ድሓን ክንምልሶ ኢና እቲ ህዝብና ግን ናይ ሰላማዊ ህዝቢ ደም ዝፈሰሰ ፈሲሱ ከም ዘይተርፍ ንሕና ነብሲ ወከፍ ብሓደ ኮይና ነዚኣ ዕላማ ከመይ ጌርና ከም ንወፀላ ሓበሬታ እዚኣ ዘመሓላልፍ ብጣዕሚ የቀኒየልና ኣይኖ ኣብዚ ኣትኩም ዘለኹም ሓደ ሓደ እንግሊዝኛ ዝልኩም ትፅሕፉ ኣለኹም ይረአ ኣለኹና thank you I just gave summary of the strength of the will of our people we are united we are going to continue remaining united until the war on Tigray ends until a UN mandated investigators entered to Tigray and held those criminals accountable. Again, I didn't say Abiy Ahmed, I didn't say Isaias Afwerki, I didn't say so-and-so. I'm talking about those who commit atrocity. For those of you, my Amhara brothers and sisters that are now I'm going to call you because Mr. Mesfin just educated me to love, not hate. Let me challenge you with this. Speak out for truth, speak out for justice. Let the UN have a mandated, unbiased investigators go in, investigate. And if you, in your lifetime, find anyone from Tigray was involved in any of this ethnic cleansing, I would be sitting with you next to you, and I will be the one paying for your beer and coffee, whatever you want. But until then, let's have a reality check. and have the guts to get up and say, independent investigation is due, humanitarian crisis is due now. Enough is enough. Thank you very much. Unless Mr. Mesfin, you have a last moment. I'm about to end the broadcasting. I still want to chat with you at the end when I end the broadcasting, but if you have anything else, please.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And I just want to reassure everyone that Tigray will prevail. Our heroes on the field are sacrificing. There is very little compared to what they do. Our effort here is just minuscule, as I say. So let's give them all the support and the necessary. Let's keep them in our prayers. Let's keep them in our thoughts. Let's keep them in our strength. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Cyber Power of Tigray. Keep an eye on social media. I possibly might be coming back tonight with some young Tagars as well. But for sure, we're going to be airing more and more English broadcasting so that those of you who struggle to understand or hear Tigrinya, we are here to share with you what's happening in English. So we'll continue. And I am going to invite Mr. Mesfin again. Thank you very much.
Anytime. Thank you.